Welcome. This short video we're going to talk about supply, demand, and look at some market equilibrium examples. Specifically, we're going to think about what factors affect supply and demand and figuring out how to match an event to supply or demand change, what direction that factor pushes supply or demand, and then finally how shifts will affect the price and the quantity in the market equilibrium. Factors affecting demand include several categories. One of those is income, prices of related goods, buyer expectations, the number of buyers, and preferences. Now let's talk about each of these a little bit more. So in the case of income, most goods are normal good. Higher income means we purchase more goods. In terms of the price of related goods, we're thinking about both substitutes and complements. So remember, for substitutes are goods we might use instead of that good in the market. Complements are goods that are used together, like peanut butter and jelly, or like breakfast cereal and milk. Buyer expectations about what's going to happen to a market or a price in the future will affect what they want to buy today. The number of buyers will also be very important. Total population or even demographic changes of an older or younger population will affect the demand for certain goods and services. And then finally, preferences. Preferences change over time, and so we expect the demand for goods and services to follow those preferences. For example, preferences about casual dress versus formal dress affects the demand for neckties. There are also multiple factors affecting supply. Cost of inputs, prices of related goods, seller expectations, the number of sellers, and productivity. Again, the cost of inputs will be important. It will affect the cost of production and therefore how much suppliers are willing to supply at any given price. Prices of related goods, there are substitutes and complements in production. There are goods that can be switched back and forth on a production line, or goods that are naturally produced together in the same production process. Seller expectations of prices or input availability will affect production decisions today. The total number of sellers in the market will affect the quantity available. And then finally, productivity. How well are we producing? If producers get more efficient at making things, that's going to affect the supply curve. So if we want to understand changes in equilibrium, I recommend about a 3-step process to figure out what's going on. So the first question we ask is, does this event affect the buyer or the seller? Because that'll tell us whether or not it affects the demand or the supply curve. The second question we ask is, what direction? Does this increase or decrease the demand or supply curve, depending on our answer to the first question? So an increase is always a shift right, a decrease is always a shift left. And then finally, what happens to price and quantity? When we figure out what curve shifts and what direction, we draw that graph, and it'll be very easy to see what happens to price and quantity in equilibrium. Here's a reminder. This is a big pitfall in this model when we're learning it. A shift in supply or demand will lead to a change in the equilibrium price. So if supply or demand shifts, we will have a new price in equilibrium. However, the opposite here is not true. A change in the equilibrium price does not lead to a shift of supply and demand. Instead, it comes from a shift in supply or demand. So now let's consider some specific products and think this through. Consider the market for coffee. How will a decrease in the price of tea affect this market? And let's use this step-by-step process. So first we ask, is this the buyer or the seller? Tea is a substitute good for coffee in consumption. People might drink coffee or tea. They might have a preference, but they might be willing to substitute. So this is really affecting the buyers. And because it's affecting the buyers, it's the demand curve that's going to shift. What direction? Well, here in this case, there's a decrease in the price of tea. So the substitute is lower. So if tea is more of a bargain, we expect that some people are going to switch away from coffee and drink tea instead because of the lower price. Therefore, the demand for coffee will decrease or a shift left. Let's draw the picture and see what happens to price and quantity for coffee. So we start in our original point with the supply and demand graph. We've just decided that it's the demand curve that shifts and it decreases, which is a shift to the left. So in drawing the new and old equilibrium, it's very easy to see what will happen. At this new equilibrium, we have a lower price and a lower quantity. So as demand falls, both the price and the quantity are going to fall in equilibrium. Let's think about a different market and a different event. Consider the market for t-shirts. If the price of cotton rises, what happens to this market? Well, again, let's ask the question, buyer or seller. In this case, cotton is the input in t-shirt production. So we're really talking about a production decision, which is the seller of the t-shirts, and that is the supply curve. So here, our supply curve is going to shift. What direction? Well, cotton got more expensive. A higher input price means a higher cost of production, means suppliers are less willing to supply t-shirts at any given price. And that is a decrease or a shift to the left. Let's draw what happens. So here we have our original supply and demand diagram, and then our new supply curve will be to the left of the old one. That's a decrease. So even though the supply curve looks a little higher, it's a shift to the left, and that's a decrease. We draw the old and new equilibrium points, and we can see that with the decrease in supply, the price of t-shirts is going to rise, the quantity of t-shirts in the market is going to fall. One more example. Consider the market for Kleenex. Suppose we have a bad flu season. What would happen to this market? Buyer or seller? Well, in a bad flu season, we're talking about people who might need to use Kleenex. So we're talking about buyers. And this effect could come in a couple ways. It could be during flu season people prefer brand name tissues over the generic that are easier on their face, so they flock to the Kleenex. Or just that the number of buyers of Kleenex is higher because more people are sick and need them. Either way, it's the demand curve that's going to shift. And because Kleenex and other facial tissues will be purchased for flu-like type illnesses, the direction is an increase or to the right. More buyers, more preference for Kleenex, the demand for Kleenex will shift to the right. So starting with our individual diagram, our original diagram, we have a demand curve, a new one that's to the right of the old one, somewhere here. Draw the old and the new equilibrium, and we see with an increase in demand, we would expect a higher price for Kleenex and a higher quantity as well.